What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. If you have multiple characters, don't load them up in one chapter or just introduce them by having them in the room talking to your characters. You want to stagger their entrances and give each character their own moment. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach. And each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. We often talk about creating compelling characters, but characters are defined and revealed in relationship to other characters. Great stories are about the relations and the interaction between people and the effect they have on one another. Drama is essentially interpersonal. It's about people who interact with others. They influence others, and ultimately, they change as a result. The dynamics between characters are an essential part of character and plot development. So in this episode, I'm going to give you 4 ways to think about your characters' relationships so that they're dynamic, so that relationships are just as compelling and memorable as any individual character. So whenever you put your characters together, you want to set off some sparks. Now, I'm not talking about arguments or fights. It could be that, but that's not what I mean by sparks. There's got to be chemistry between characters. That doesn't necessarily mean attraction, but even with characters who are diametrically opposed, something is bringing them together. Some situation. Maybe they both want the same thing, or an important decision must be made that affects both characters. When you have characters with chemistry, something new will emerge from these relationships. When you put any 2 people together or a group of people, you wind up with something new. It may be a new identity or a redirection in what to do next. The transformation may be deeper self-knowledge or self-acceptance. You want to bring chemistry, friction, or some kind of sizzle between characters. Without that, the story is going to fall flat, and the characters will feel boring to the reader, like props, and the purpose of supporting characters won't be clear. Whether they're romantic partners, a married couple, siblings, colleagues, or enemies, something or some situation is going to bring them together and keep them together. And the end result is that something new will arise. You never want a character who's just in the room for no reason, or your reason for putting them there isn't clear. They should spin the story in a different direction or lead to your character's growth. So here are 4 elements to keep in mind so you can create more compelling, dynamic character relationships. Number 1, something should bring them together. So there's got to be some kind of bond or something they have in common. For example, I was just rewatching the movie Rain Man with Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman. Tom Cruise plays Charlie, and Dustin Hoffman plays his older brother Raymond, who has severe autism and has been institutionalized most of his life. Charlie doesn't even know he has a brother until his father dies, and he learns that the only thing his father left him was an antique car and a rose bush. He also learns that the multi-million-dollar inheritance went to someone else who he tracks down at this institution and learns that Raymond is his brother. So that's the bond. That's what brings these brothers together, the father's inheritance. The bond could be attraction, romantic or physical. Maybe the 2 characters are married to other people, but they're both lonely in their marriages. So their marital unhappiness brings them together. The bond could be a murder case that 2 detectives are trying to solve. So people are brought together for some reason. Characters have something in common that brings them together and keeps them together. Okay, on to element number 2, conflict. Now, some conflicts are very easy to demonstrate because the characters are either competing for the same thing or character B is interfering with character A, getting what he or she wants. So you have the protagonist versus the antagonist. But what if your characters like each other? What if they're happily married for the most part? What if your characters are best friends or business partners? What if they're romantically drawn to one another? What do you do when characters are attracted to one another? How do you create conflict? How do you create drama? Well, the conflict could be something that threatens to pull these characters apart, and that's what creates the drama. Whenever you have characters who get along, siblings, friends, romantic interests, you want to set up barriers that threaten to pull these characters apart. So barriers could be a working relationship. Maybe they're colleagues or it's an employer-employee relationship. But at least one character should recognize the problems that can occur from getting together by consummating this romantic interest. And so this character will resist the attraction. So the tension comes from playing with these boundaries. For example, a college professor and a student, or 2 lovers married to different people. There's got to be some kind of boundary or barrier, or else the reader is going to question why these 2 are not getting together already. They may even interpret it as the characters being disinterested in one another. So, number 2, conflict. Okay, on to element 3, contrast. Conflict happens between flawed human beings who clash in some way. Characters are always opposites in some way, and this can generate new conflicts and create stronger characters through that opposition. And when you draw out their differences, you get conflict, even between characters who are attracted to one another or who like each other. So you want to draw out differences between characters. Every character may have different political beliefs or a different social construct, different worldviews, personality traits, professions, different roles, different ways of relating, and all of these can clash. So you want to draw out human differences in any interaction. You don't want to put people together in a scene without some kind of dramatic tension, some element of conflict. Contrast defines characters in relationship to another character. Opposites are fun to play with because it leads to the most interesting dynamics. Any relational story, whether it's a romance, a business partnership, a marriage, a child-parent relationship, or a friendship, will have contrast. Those contrasts may be a choice of jobs or professional pursuits. Relationship to their spouses may be different. Moral choices may be different. Sometimes the contrast will come from the ethnicity or financial status, class, age, ideologies, and ways of approaching story problems, which I think is the most interesting way to draw contrasts, especially between characters who are intimate with one another. A husband and wife may want the same thing, let's say to escape suburbia and live on a farm, but they'll have different motives and different ideas about how to achieve that. Character contrast can come from having different ambitions, different motivations, different backgrounds. Let's say you have two detectives pairing up to solve a crime. Maybe one detective is very buttoned up and detached from the murder, and his partner may be emotionally raw and volatile. Sometimes something infuriates a character because it triggers a side of them that they've repressed. But in any relationship, even a loving one, there will be contrast. And that's a great way to bring more dramatic tension to your story. For example, Elizabeth McCracken's novel, Niagara Falls All Over Again, is about a vaudeville duo, Mose Sharp and Rocky Carter. Now, Sharp, the narrator, is the straight man to Carter, who's the fat, funny guy, who, by the way, transforms Mose's life. So they have something in common, vaudeville, but they are opposites. Whether characters get along or not, you want to create contrasts so that they're diametrically opposed. Okay, on to number 4, impact. You want to ask, how do these characters change each other? A common mantra for story is, does the character change and grow? Your characters have the potential to transform each other, for better or for worse. Now, often I'll see characters introduced late in the story, sometimes in Act 2, and it's not clear to me why that character is there. They don't have any clear story purpose. And I'll ask, why is this character essential to the story? How will they impact the main character moving forward? The strongest stories show the impact one character can have on another. For example, Breaking Bad. We have Walter White, who's a physics teacher, who also has a meth lab on the side, and Jesse, his former high school student, who has all the connections to sell the product on the street. And by the end of the series, Walter White has gained a sense of personal power and identity, and Jesse has deteriorated beyond recognition. He's diminished over the course of the series. Now, Walter White could not have had his transformation without Jesse, and Jesse would have been better off without getting involved with Walter. So you want to think of what brings characters together, what bonds them together, and how are they opposites, or what barriers are threatening to keep them apart. And then how do these relationships allow each one to evolve? In Rain Man, you have Charlie and Raymond. Charlie starts out as this superficial, selfish, self-serving wheeler and dealer. When he learns that he was disinherited and that it went to a brother he never knew, he takes Raymond out of the institution where he's been cared for his whole life, and he takes him on a road trip. And the goal is to get his inheritance, or at least half of it. Now, the thing that brings these brothers together is the inheritance, but they are as different as can be. They repel each other. They're opposites in the way they walk and talk, the way they think. They're together because their father died, but in every other way, they go in vastly different directions. Charlie starts out frustrated and hostile towards his brother because his only end is to get that inheritance, and he sees Raymond as a stranger and not someone worthy of their father's money. So he takes him on a 3-day road trip because Raymond is afraid of flying. And while they're on this road trip, Charlie learns that his brother is a savant. He has a photographic memory. And that's when things start to shift. He sees this as an opportunity to win gambling at a casino. And slowly he develops affection and sensitivity, even respect for his brother. And by the end, Charlie is a totally different person. He's no longer emotionally shut off. He now has a relationship with his brother. And although Raymond's caretakers insist on bringing him back to the institution, we know Charlie will now visit him regularly, and the inheritance is no longer even an issue. Now, these are the two main characters, but what about supporting characters or even minor characters? You never want to put a character in a story who feels superfluous to the reader or creates expectations that don't deliver. Even a minor character can have some role in the story. For example, in Rain Man, when they're in the diner, the waitress isn't just taking the order. She's instrumental in Charlie learning that his brother has a photographic memory. If you mention a character in any scene and you have them interact with your other characters, the reader will expect that person to have some impact on the story, some impact on your main character's plight. And they should impact the character's transformation for better or for worse. Now, if you have multiple characters, don't load them up in one chapter or just introduce them by having them in the room talking to your characters. You want to stagger their entrances and give each character their own moment. Sometimes a character will be mentioned briefly in Act 1, and we won't see that person again until Act 2, and by that time, we've forgotten about him or her and their relationship to the main character because they didn't have their own moment. So when you have multiple characters, even if some are minor, like a waitress, make sure they're relevant to moving the story forward. If that character impacts what happens on the plot level, if they affect your main character, give them their own moment so that it makes a lasting impression on your reader. When you have multiple characters, all their individual storylines should converge in some way by the end. I'm thinking of a novel I read over the summer, Little Children by Tom Perrotta. So we have the two main characters, Sarah and Todd, and then we have their spouses. We also have a couple of neighbors. We have a convicted child molester who moves back to town, and we have his mother, who he lives with. And then we have the ex-cop who is hell-bent on driving this convict out of town. Now, all of these characters impact the lives of the two main characters, and it all comes together at the end. Okay, let's recap. We talked about 4 elements to think about when creating character relationships. Number 1, characters have something in common that brings them together and keeps them together. Number 2, there's a conflict that threatens to pull the characters apart, some kind of barrier. And number 3, contrast. Characters are opposites. They have contrasting qualities, and this creates new conflicts. And number 4, impact. Characters have the potential to transform each other for better or for worse. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.